Negatio, Anagawa, you to make it lento. I give every honey and why you know about. I forgot about Negatio, Anagawa, you make it lento. I give every honey and why you know about. Eligi, so Aligi, baby, fire, 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 good lento. While I
We are here. We're alive.
I know you're gonna dig this.
you may nigga buga wage. You may nigga buga wage. Why I be babe, fire, 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 good lento. While I hate me, I'm so. I think why I be babe, so. While I hate me, I'm so. Negatio, Anagawa, you to make it lento. I give every honey and why you know about. Negatio, Anagawa, you make it lento. I give every honey and why you know about. Eligi, why I be babe, fire, fire.
September
Yes,
11th, we are here. We are alive.
Good afternoon, everyone. We invite you to take your seats at this time in preparation for resumption of our sessions. I know during the lunch break, I saw some folks at the nearby Stoplight restaurant experiencing some of our local cuisine. And we hope that you are refreshed and now raring to go again. At this point, we acknowledge the presence of the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralphie Gonsalves, who has joined us and will present a little later on. As you are aware, there's one presentation which has spilled over from the morning session. So at this point, we will resume with Vanessa Demercier's presentation, which should have been before break, and then we will continue as usual. So at this point, it's my pleasure to introduce you to this session's moderator. His name is Mr. Vincent Reed. Please put your hands together as Vincent comes to take over.
Pleasant good afternoon to you all. And I'm very thankful and happy to be here. I see you are enjoying yourselves so that the time ran way past your lunch break, but you enjoyed it. We're going to continue on. There's something simple about me that I like to let everyone know when I stand at a podium moderating anything. I run a tight ship. We're sticking to time this afternoon. We may be an hour behind, but we're going to make it tight. So without any further ado, I'd like to invite Miss Vanessa Demercier to make her presentation. Her topic today is, and she should have been here before, I'm getting that for you. Put me here. Lost Voices, Found Stories, French Sources of Kalinago and the Black Carib. Miss Demercier.
Honorable Prime Minister Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, and visiting delegation, distinguished guests, thank you very much. Good afternoon. I'm sorry, I've been moved in different spots. I'm not really sure, but I am grateful actually to be on this panel and to have the Prime Minister's attention. So, before I begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge how special this occasion is to me. After missing it for 2 years, as Ronnie has said before, I was away for 2 years, but this is officially my 10th International Garifuna Conference, and I am really delighted to have a delegation from La Buga, Livingstone here, because this is where I started my research. And a gentleman named Dombeto, who passed away now, actually gave me the mission of going and tell the story of the Garifuna people, and that's what took me to St. Vincent about 20 years ago. Yes. So from meeting the first homecoming delegations to adapting to a virtual format during COVID, to witnessing how much this conference has grown, have been seen firsthand, the strength and the partnerships and connection that have been built along the way. Being here today is one of the reasons I needed to come back to St. Vincent. After attending day one of this conference, I think that all of us can agree that we felt very inspired yesterday. We got a lot of information, a lot of nice presentation, discussions, and knowledge shared. I felt some of the things also said directly, such as the difficulty for your research and you to be taken seriously sometimes. and also the importance of Dr. Fraser in the advancement and the motivation of researchers, and other local historians, of course. The voices in this room, the work being done, and the solidarity I have witnessed prove that this is not just a conversation, it's a movement, and it's growing stronger every year. I would love, oh, our gentleman is here. I'm sorry, Patrice, that you were not here this morning. You would have seen all the students involved, and I think that you can tell that the Garifuna Heritage Foundation has been primordial in all of this happening, so I really would like to commend the Garifuna Heritage Foundation for this, and to thank UWI for their continuous support too. I'm also incredibly grateful and proud to be part of the Garifuna Reparations Committee, and my role in this effort is to highlight the French sources available for the case of reparations, ensuring that historical evidence for multiple perspectives strengthens our call for justice. And this takes us to the subject of today's presentation. I will start by saying that this presentation is not about romanticizing, defending French over British colonization. Both colonial powers pursued their own interests, often at the expense of indigenous peoples. The French were not more altruistic than the British. They simply had a different geopolitical motivations and strategies. However, the records that they left behind provide an alternative perspective, and one that can help us better understand the Kalinago and Black Caribs beyond the lens of colonial conquest. For centuries, the history of the Black Caribs, Kalinago, and Garifuna has been told through a colonial lens, often distorting or erasing their true agency and resistance. British sources, being the most accessible, have long dominated the narrative, depicting the Black Caribs as rebellious and their forced deportation as a justified necessity. However, French missionaries, explorers, and chroniclers documented a different perspective, one that is a more detailed one, a nuanced account of their political structures, resistance strategy, and diplomacy. So today I will guide you through these French sources and their significance in three parts: the missionaries and their role as both evangelizers and diplomats, the early explorers and chroniclers and their accounts on the Kalinago and Black Carib society, and the importance of these sources today and how they reshape historical narratives and strengthen the case for reparation. The arrival of the first Dominican missionaries in 1635 marked the beginning of religious missions in the Lesser Antilles. Their primary goal was to convert Kalinagos and Black Caribs to Catholicism, but this task proved far more difficult than anticipated. From the outset, missionaries faced several obstacles. The semi-nomadic lifestyle, unlike the sedentary indigenous societies of Mexico or Peru, for example, the Kalinago frequently moved between coastal settlements and islands, making permanent mission structures difficult to establish. The Kalinago and Black Carib society also had deeply ingrained spiritual beliefs that did not align with Christian doctrine. Rituals, ancestors' veneration, and their relationship with nature played a central role in their worldview. And then, due to their long-standing resistance to colonial rule, many Kalinagos view missionaries as potential spies or agents of conquest rather than neutral religious figures. Recognizes the need to bridge the cultural gap, Father Raymond Breton undertook one of the most ambitious linguistic projects of the time. He compiled a French Carib dictionary in 1665 and a grammar book in 1666, some of the first recorded linguistic studies of an indigenous Caribbean language. His work was instrumental in documenting Kalinago oral traditions, vocabulary, and grammatical structures, offering us one of the few written records of their language today. However, even with these efforts, conversion rates remained low, as indigenous resistance to European religious system persisted. Over time, various Catholic orders became involved in missionary work among the Kalinago and Black Caribs. So the Dominicans, from 1635 onward, focused on learning the language, adapting Christian teachings to indigenous culture. The Jesuits were more aggressive in their approach. They sought to establish permanent mission settlements. However, their presence often provoked hostility, as they were perceived as colonial agents. And then we have the Capucin and Franciscan, I'm sorry for my pronunciation, worked primarily with African populations, but also interacted with indigenous communities, sometimes serving as intermediaries in colonial conflicts. So despite these efforts, many Kalinago and Black Caribs rejected Christianity, seeing it as another form of colonial control. The Kalinago and Black Caribs were more willing to negotiate with missionaries for political or economic advantages than to adopt Christianity itself. The missionaries faced resistance not only from indigenous communities, but also from European settlers who had different priorities: land, trade, and expansion. While the primary goal of missionaries was religious conversion, they often found themselves playing a diplomatic role, acting as intermediaries between the French settlers, indigenous groups, and European colonial administrations. Missionaries were often the first European to establish close contact with Kalinago and Black Carib leaders. Their ability to communicate in the local language allowed them to negotiate peace treaties, resolve disputes, and even intervene in military conflicts. Father Raymond Breton, who we mentioned, one of the first Dominican missionaries to actively defend the Kalinago against French colonial aggression, in Guadeloupe, he opposed Governor Lolive's attempt to enslave or attack indigenous groups, arguing that the Kalinago should be converted, not conquered. Father Jean-Baptiste Dutertre, a French Dominican historian and missionary who wrote extensively about Kalinago's social and political structures, unlike many European chroniclers, he acknowledged their intelligence and strategic diplomacy, describing them as fierce warriors but also skilled negotiators. His work influenced how later French administrators view Kalinago relations. And Father Jean-Baptiste Labat, a Jesuit priest who spent years in the Caribbean and wrote about how Kalinago skillfully navigated European rivalries, Labat observed that the Kalinago were not simply victims of colonization, but they were active players in a complex political landscape, often manipulating French and British interests to their advantages. The Treaty of 1660 marks a diplomatic turning point. It's the most significant moment in missionary diplomacy, and it was signed between the Kalinago, the French, and the British. This treaty recognized indigenous sovereignty over St. Vincent and Dominica, effectively making them neutral territories where European powers agreed not to settle permanently. So why was this important? It was one of the first European treaties to acknowledge indigenous land rights in the Caribbean. It protected Kalinago and Black Caribs communities from immediate displacement, at least temporarily. And missionaries were allowed to continue their religious work, but with restrictions. Indigenous groups had the right to refuse conversion if they wished. Despite the treaty, French and British settlers continued to violate it, leading to tensions and conflicts that would escalate in the following decades. Missionary diplomacy was not always welcomed by indigenous communities, especially when they were seen as too closely aligned with colonial interests. In 1654, 2 Jesuit priests were killed in St. Vincent, highlighting the risks of European involvement in Kalinago affairs. While some missionaries like Breton and Dutertre worked to preserve peace, others were often viewed as agents of French expansion. The death of these priests served as a warning. The Kalinagos were willing to negotiate, but they would not tolerate European interference in their autonomy. Missionaries found themselves working a fine line between diplomacy and colonialism. On one hand, their efforts at negotiation and mediation helped avert wars and secure temporary peace agreements. But on the other hand, their ultimate goal, converting indigenous peoples to Christianity, often aligned with colonial ambitions, making their presence controversial. By studying these missionaries' accounts, we gain a rare perspective on Kalinago-French relations, one that acknowledges indigenous agency and highlights the diplomatic intelligence of the Black Caribs and Kalinago. French explorers, historians, and missionaries were among the first Europeans to document the Kalinago and Black Caribs in detail. Their records provide invaluable descriptions of political organizations, social structures, warfare strategies, and cultural practices, many of which contradict later British colonial stereotypes. Unlike the British, whose narrative often depicted the Black Caribs as violent and uncivilized, French chroniclers offered a more complex and nuanced view. These accounts do not erase colonial bias, but they provide rich ethnographic details that help us reconstruct the history of the Kalinago and Black Caribs from multiple perspectives. So we have some key French authors and their contribution. We already named Jean-Baptiste Duterte. We named as well Fada Laba. We have Sieur de Laborde and Julien Simon. These two French chroniclers focused on linguistic and social structures, documenting the importance of oral tradition in Kalinago governance. Their records show that Black Carib leaders, called capitaines, governed through councils, debates, and alliances, debunking myths that indigenous governance was disorganized or primitive. Alexandre Moreau de Jones was a French military officer and historian. Moreau de Jones provided first-hand military intelligence reports on the resistance tactics of the Black Caribs. His accounts are crucial for understanding how the Black Caribs adapted their warfare technique using a combination of hit-and-run attacks, strategic retreats, and psychological warfare against European forces. His writings challenged the idea that the Black Caribs were easily defeated. Instead, they reveal a highly organized resistance movement. We have several descriptions of the Kalinago and Black Carib lives. These accounts provide rich ethnographic details, as I was saying. So we know about the political organization, such as the fact that decisions were made collectively through councils, as I was saying. Moreau de Jones noted that their leaders were not absolute rulers. They had to earn their trust, the trust of their warriors and community. On the social and domestic life, we've learned about family structures that were matrilineal, meaning inheritance and lineage were traced through the mother's side. Women played key role in agricultural production, while men were responsible for fishing, hunting, and warfare. Marriage alliances were strategic, often used to strengthen inter-island political connections. Resistance strategies, like the Kalinago and Black Caribs, developed sophisticated military strategies to defend their territories. They used small, fast-moving canoes to launch raids on enemy settlements. They also built hidden escape routes in the mountains, allowing them to disappear into the landscape when necessary. These accounts provide some of the earliest description of African Maroons integrating with Kalinago society. Over time, this blending gave rise to the Garifuna people, who would later become a powerful force in St. Vincent. Again, these writings of early explorers and chroniclers are not without bias. They were still European interpreting indigenous societies through a colonial lens. However, they are invaluable for reconstructing a more complete history of the Black Caribs and Kalinago. They provide evidence that indigenous and Afro-indigenous groups were not passive victims, but active players in Caribbean geopolitics. They helped correct British colonial distortion, which portrayed the Black Caribs as a chaotic and disorganized group. And they laid the foundation for modern Garifuna identity, showing how the community emerged through centuries of resistance and adaptation. So these early French sources allow us to reclaim lost voices and rewrite the history of the Black Caribs on their own terms. So this is the book from Father Breton. This is Jean-Baptiste Duterte. And we have here Père Laba as well. The Kalinago and Black Caribs were not passive victims of the Europeans, as we said. They were skilled warriors, strategists, diplomats who actively resisted European control for centuries. From the first European incursion into the Lesser Antilles, the Kalinago and Black Caribs developed sophisticated military tactics to defend their land and sovereignty, such as guerrilla warfare and surprise attacks, but also fortifications and escape routes, as we said before. Sorry. One of the most significant alliances in Caribbean history was the union between escaped African slaves, Maroons, and the Kalinago. French accounts confirm that as early as the 1600s, runaway slaves from European plantations sought refuge among the Kalinagos in St. Vincent. Over time, these escaped Africans intermarried with the Kalinagos, creating a new, powerful Afro-Indigenous group known today as the Garifuna, or Black Caribs then. The Garifuna emerged as a distinct ethnic and political group. combining African resistance tactics with indigenous knowledge of the land. Moreau de Jones described how Black Caribs used African-style fortifications, including hidden trenches and wooden palisades, to defend against British and French invasion. This alliance was crucial in resisting European expansion, as the Garifuna were able to combine Kalinago knowledge and African military traditions. The Kalinago and Black Caribs first fiercely resisted European colonization in St. Vincent, which remained one of the last strongholds of indigenous sovereignty in the Caribbean. For the First Carib War, the British attempted to take full control of St. Vincent, but the Black Caribs under Chief Joseph Chatoyer launched a coordinated resistance. French chroniclers recorded how the Black Caribs used deception, ambush tactics, and knowledge of the terrain to push back British forces, and the war ended in a treaty that recognized Black Carib sovereignty over parts of St. Vincent. On the Second Carib War, the British broke the treaty and invaded Black Caribs' lands again. This time, the Black Caribs allied with the French revolutionaries, hoping to drive out the British entirely. British colonial records often depicted the Black Caribs as rebellious troublemakers, justifying their forced removal. However, French sources tell a different story. These sources confirm that Black Caribs did not seek war. They fought to defend their homeland against foreign aggression. The British framed their displacement as necessary for peace, but French accounts revealed that the Black Caribs were victims of colonial expansion and betrayal. So again, why this matters today? Understanding the true history of Kalinago and Black Carib resistance is essential for one, correcting historical distortion that framed them as savages rather than strategic, intelligent leaders. Recognizing their struggle as part of the broader fight against colonialism, and then strengthening the case for reparations, since these sources prove that the Black Caribs were forcibly removed from their homeland in violation of treaties. By reclaiming these stories from French sources, we honor the resilience and courage of the Black Caribs and Kalinago, who fought for their land, their people, and their future. The British perspective on the Black Caribs was shaped by their imperial ambitions in the Caribbean. By the late 18th century, St. Vincent was a strategic economy asset, and British settlers wanted full control of the island. By portraying the Black Caribs as lawless rebels, the British could frame their removal as necessary for stability, rather than as an act of forced displacement. French sources provide a different picture. Though they were still shaped by colonial interests, unlike the British who saw the Black Caribs as enemies, the French often viewed them as potential allies against British expansion. Moreau de Jones described the Black Caribs as formidable warriors who understood European warfare as well as their own. The French had their own colonial ambitions, but because they were often competing with the British for Caribbean territory, their accounts tended to emphasize Black Carib strength, organization, and political agency. The contrast between French and British portrayals was not just a matter of perspective, it was deeply political. So these differences in narrative were not neutral. They were propaganda tools used to justify colonial policies. For centuries, British colonial narrative dominated historical records, influencing how the Black Caribs were remembered. By studying French sources alongside British ones, historians can reconstruct a fuller, more accurate history of the Kalinago and Black Caribs, one that recognizes their diplomatic intelligence, military strength, and struggle against colonization. Now, why this matter for reparation and historical justice? Understanding these narratives is not just an academic exercise. It has real-world implications today, particularly in the case for reparations. British sources framed the Black Caribs deportation as necessary, but French accounts show that this was a forced removal of a sovereign people violating treaties and basic human rights. By bringing French sources into the conversation, we strengthen the argument that the Black Caribs were victims of ethnic cleansing, not just casualties of war. The reparations movement benefits from a broader historical record, not just the British justification for removal, but also the French documentation of Black Carib diplomacy, governance, and resistance. So we must continue to research and make these sources accessible so that future generations understand the true history of the Black Caribs. Caribbean historians must challenge outdated British colonial narratives and bring French account into mainstream historical discussions. The case for reparation must be built on multiple sources, including French documents that highlight the wrongful deportation and forced exile of the Black Caribs. The power of history lies in who tells the story. For too long, British colonial sources shaped how the Black Caribs were remembered. But by revisiting French records, indigenous oral histories, and modern archaeological research, we can ensure that the true voices of the Kalinago and Black Caribs are heard and recognized. The study of the Kalinago and Black Caribs is not just based on colonial documents. Modern archaeology, linguistics, and historical research have played a crucial role in validating French historical accounts and challenging British colonial narratives. For centuries, as the Black Caribs' history was distorted or erased, particularly after their deportation in 1797. However, recent discovery and reinterpretation of colonial sources have allowed historians and archaeologists to reconstruct a more accurate picture of their civilization. Recent archaeological research in St. Vincent has confirmed many details originally recorded by French chroniclers such as Duterte, Labat, or Moreau de Jonas. Argyle, St. Vincent, for example, we had excavations of Kalinago and Black Carib settlements. They have uncovered evidence of Kalinago villages, fortifications, and agricultural practices that match descriptions found in French missionary records. French sources noted that the Kalinagos lived in well-organized communities with communal living spaces, exactly what archaeologists have uncovered. The discovery of specialized pottery, tools, and fishing equipment shows that these societies were economically and technologically advanced. Regarding the fortification and warfare strategies, archaeologists have found hidden escape routes, strategic defensive locations, and evidence of settlements deep in the mountains, supporting French description of Black Carib resistance tactics. The terrain of St. Vincent played a key role in these strategies. French accounts describe how Black Caribs used caves, river systems, and high-altitude villages to resist British and French attacks, and modern research confirmed that these sites were used for centuries. These findings disprove British claims that the Black Caribs were disorganized warriors and instead reinforced French description of them as highly strategic and well-prepared defenders of their land. French missionaries like Raymond Breton compiled some of the first linguistic records of the Kalinago language, and today these texts are valuable resources for indigenous language revitalization efforts. Historians are now re-examining British and French sources side by side to identify biases, distortion, and omitted details. And some key findings include on the side, so British records describe the First and Second Carib Wars as Black Carib rebellions, implying that the British had legitimate control of the island. However, French sources and recent research show that these were not rebellions, they were defensive wars against illegal British encroachment. They framed the 1797 deportation of Black Caribs as necessary for peace. However, French accounts combined with modern research show that they were forcibly removed in violations, again, of international treaties. And this strengthens the legal and historical argument for reparation. Many key documents about the Black Caribs and Kalinago remain buried in French archives. Recent research is now focused on retrieving and translating these materials, including the missionary reports on Black Carib diplomacy, French colonial correspondence, and African Caribbean connections in French sources. These documents could revolutionize our understanding of Afro-Indigenous history and provide new evidence for legal and historical claims related to the reparation. The combination of archaeology, linguistic research, and historical interpretation makes it clear that one, the Black Caribs were a sovereign people with a complex social and military structure, not the lawless rebels portrayed in British records. Their forced deportation was an act of ethnic cleansing, not an inevitable outcome of colonial warfare. The reparations movement must incorporate these findings, using French sources and modern discoveries to counter British justification for removal. There is still more to uncover. As Caribbean and African researchers gain greater access to French archives, we may find even more evidence that strengthens the historical and legal case for reparations. French sources need to be more widely accessible to Caribbean scholars and indigenous researchers. There must be more funding for historical and linguistic research on the Kalinago and Black Caribs. And collaboration between Caribbean and African historians must continue to explore new archives and oral histories. We must ensure that the real history of the Kalinago and Black Caribs is taught in Caribbean and Garifuna communities. By combining French historical records, indigenous oral traditions, and modern archaeological research, we can finally restore the full history of the Black Caribs and validate their struggle and strengthen the call for justice. So these French sources are more than just historical documents. They are evidences. For too long, British colonial narratives have dominated the discussion. But when we examine French records, we see a different perspective, one that exposes the deliberate dispossession, forced displacement, and destruction of the Black Caribs. This history is at the heart of the reparations movement. These documents prove that the Black Caribs were sovereign peoples with established political systems. They show that the British violated treaties and engaged in forced removal. They offer a historical foundation for legal and moral claims for reparation. So this is not just an academic pursuit again, it is a movement. By reclaiming these lost voices and found stories, we are not just rewriting history. We are ensuring that the struggles and resilience of the Black Caribs and Kalinago are recognized, remembered, and ultimately repaired. Thank you, Seremaine.
Thank you very much, Ms. Vanessa. I'd just like you to know that we have indicated you were given your extra 15 minutes for being pushed back
I
2 days.
appreciate it.
So,
Thank you very much.
compensation. Ladies and gentlemen, the French source of information, we've heard about it in several forums continuously. And I am not sure if we are yet to tap in to that source to get a more credible or another voice, another picture of the history surrounding the Garifuna people and the resistance that took place in St. Vincent on mainland UWI. So we're going to take the next speaker, and at the end of that, you would have questions for Ms. Vanessa and the other speakers. So take your notes. We're going to take the next speaker now. Ms. Felisa Baines-Ross is lecturer in English at Yale University. She teaches and writes on topics including home and migration, empire, religious nonconformity, and cultures of descent in medieval England and the Caribbean. Her work has been published in Journal of Medieval and Early Modern Studies, the Caribbean Quarterly, the Caribbean Writer, and Pedagogy, Critical Approaches to Teaching Literature, Language, Composition, and Culture. Her current research explores the relationship between religious descent and literary experimentation among Lollard's writers of the 14th century. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Felisa Baines-Ross would present to you on the topic Pedagogies of Resistance and Resilience, Narrative of the Garifuna Agency. Dr. Ross.
Thank you. I want to say thank you to my co-panelists, Ms. Vanessa Demirchen, and of course to the Honorable Prime Minister. I also want to say thank you to Ms. Zoila Ellis-Brown and Mr. David Williams and the Garifuna Heritage Foundation for organizing this conference, and of course to everyone in the audience. All right, so my talk is titled Pedagogies of Resistance and Resilience, Narrative and Garifuna Agency. Right, I'm just waiting for the... Okay, here we go. So I want to begin with this scene from Agostinho Brunius titled A Negro Festival Drawn from Nature in the Island of St. Vincent. Born in Rome, Brunius came to the Caribbean in 1764 and was commissioned as a personal painter to William Young, while Young was a governor on St. Vincent. In his paintings, Brunius depicted planter families, tropical landscapes, as well as free and enslaved people of color in Dominica, St. Kitts, Barbados, and St. Vincent. What's unusual about his paintings, as other scholars have noted, is the way that Brunius seems to humanize his subjects, painting Black and indigenous people as refined and cultivated. And as you can see in the painting, the subjects are dressed up in European clothing, engaged in social activities. Brunius's Negro Festival offers his European audience a picture of life in the 18th century Caribbean, an idyllic vision of plantation society, free from the violence of colonialism and the threat of indigenous resistance. Such paintings render in visual terms how Europe imagined the Caribbean, as a terrestrial paradise simply waiting to be cultivated and assimilated into the broader geography of empire. During the 18th century, this perspective was propagated by landscape artists, travel writers, and European colonists. For example, Alexander Anderson, who was a Scottish botanist and director of the Botanical Gardens in St. Vincent during the Second Carib War, similarly pictures St. Vincent as an island with a great variety of pleasing and romantic scenes. In one extended description of Oia, Anderson writes in his Geography and History of St. Vincent, between two bays, opposite the southern extremity of St. Lucia, juts out the peninsula Oia, nearly level, of considerable extent and elevation from the level of the sea. It is one of the pleasantest and healthiest military posts, not only in the West Indies, but perhaps in the world. The surrounding sea is furnished with the finest and most delicate species of fish, and with no great difficulty procured. Ample bounds for livestock of all descriptions, and for vegetables, a crystalline stream of the purest water on each side. Notice that Anderson highlights St. Vincent's potential for maintaining Britain's military prowess in the Lesser Antilles, as well as presents the landscape as a kind of lost Eden to be reclaimed. His language bears a striking similarity to one fictionalized travel narrative of the 14th century, The Travels of Sir John Mandeville, which was widely popular during the Middle Ages and said to be an inspiration to Christopher Columbus. The fictional narrator Mandeville claims to be an experienced traveler who reports on his voyages to his English readers, and these spaces include Jerusalem, Egypt, India, and China, among other places. Like Anderson's vision of Oia, Mandeville sees the East as a place of surplus, ready for European consumption. All manner of fishes that be there in the sea, about them come once in the year, each manner of diverse fishes, one manner of kind after another, and they cast themselves on the sea bank of that isle, so great plenty and multitude, that no man many unneth see but fish. And there they abide 3 days, and every man of the country taketh of him as him liketh. So you'll notice that in both of these descriptions, there's an emphasis on surplus and the idea that the land is simply there waiting to be consumed. I highlight the connection to this medieval travel narrative to illustrate how Brunius's painting, Anderson's narrative, and the travels of Sir John Mandeville all belong to the same discursive practice, in which foreign landscapes are painted over with imperial fantasies, often without regard for indigenous histories and ecologies. To return to Brunius's painting, implicit in this picture is the idea that the land is complicit or in agreement with the goals of empire. The painting or narrative also demonstrate how knowledge is a technology of power. By producing a visual catalog of the island's resources, these artists and writers turn the landscape into an object for Britain's domination and possession. For my talk today, I will focus on two subjects. One, how Garifuna people challenged the colonial logics within the textual and visual narratives about St. Vincent. I'll refer to Anderson, William Young, as well as letters between the colonists and War Office in the 18th century. And then, in keeping with the emphasis on pedagogy in the title of my talk, I want to consider what this history can teach us about contested spaces in the present, as well as how thinking with Garifuna's story of resistance can help students challenge dominant narratives and received histories about Indigenous people, both in St. Vincent and in North America. Despite the attempts to schematize and control Indigenous spaces, I will show how Garifuna lifeways, relationships, and land use challenge Britain's imagined geography of empire. In his study of the cartographic archive of North America and the Lesser Antilles, Max Adelson has shown that after the 7 Years' War, Britain began to view the Windward Islands less as distinct territories and more like contributing societies within a larger British Atlantic system. Surveying and mapping out the spaces in Dominica, Grenada, Tobago, and St. Vincent would allow Britain to create a new map of empire where wild, uncultivated wastelands could be turned into cash. In St. Vincent, attempts at surveying and map-making were repeatedly frustrated by the Garifuna, whose movements on the island could not be contained by some imaginary lines drawn on a map. In their rejection of European boundaries on the ground, Indigenous Vincentians maintained their sovereignty on St. Vincent and proved themselves as agents, even within hostile narratives that attempt to write them out of existence. Perhaps it goes without saying, but land, and especially cultivated land, was central to Britain's colonial project. To usurp Indigenous lands, colonists sometimes deployed a landscape aesthetic that upheld a division between cultivated and forested spaces as a sign to distinguish the elite from the vulgar. The strategy is evident in William Young's complaint over Garifuna land use and communal ownership. This district, he says, comprised the most fertile part of the island, was mostly occupied in common as by an erratic nation of savage warriors and hunters. What little cultivation there was appeared merely in small, detached spots of provision ground near to their cabins, and which were worked wholly by the women. Young discounts the women's labor, what's new, land management techniques, and the lifeways governing their land use, and he deploys this division between forested and cultivated spaces to classify Garifuna people as savage and erratic, a taxonomy to authorize their dispossession. The commodification of land within the plantation economy is only one part of the narrative, however. I want to suggest that there's an alternative story about land that emerges within the colonial narrative, one in which land plays a central role to the Garifuna story of resistance and resilience. In 1788 and 1790, Anderson lobbied for the King's Hill Bill to appropriate a section of dry woodlands in St. Vincent for conservation purposes. In his Geography and History, Anderson acknowledges the conflict between the economic advantages of acquiring land for sugarcane and the negative effects of land clearing on the environment. His bill failed to pass in 1788 and was opposed again in 1790. Some planters worried that they might lose their estates to conservation efforts, but another real fear was that forest reservation might merely give the Caribs potential cover for future insurrections. Monique Alawat's theory of the ecology of resistance in plantation zones is instructive for understanding Garifuna agency within this context. Alawat writes that the plantation zone gave rise to an ecological practice closely linked to marronage, a process through which human agents found ways to interact with non-human forces, and in so doing, resisted the order of the plantation. In the moment that Anderson calls the Garifuna cowardly for skulking behind trees and bushes, he also recognizes the expertise of the fighters who seldom miss their aim and whose tawny skin tone rendered them unobservable at a few yards' distance. The forest did not simply provide cover for the fighters. Rather, Indigenous Vincentians harnessed the powers of the landscape to resist empire. Anderson's use of geographic features, or St. Vincent's geographic features and weather-related phenomena to describe indigenous peoples' activities on St. Vincent demonstrate how much the landscape had become part of the ecology of resistance. In his description of the Connery River, Anderson writes, "As is the case with all the rivers in the island, it is dangerous to cross it while heavy rains are falling in the mountains. The vast body of water that comes rolling down in an instant, filling the channels, tumbling with it large masses of rocks and trunks of trees with an irresistible fury, carries everything before it." Likewise, when he describes one attack in Kingstown, Anderson borrows vocabulary from the descriptions of natural phenomena to depict indigenous people as hordes of desperados pouring on them from all quarters like a torrent. The Connery River is sublime in its excess, in its tendency to overflow its banks, and its challenge to the anthropocentric norm. Anderson associates both the river and indigenous Vincentians with universal destruction, a frequent worry as he contemplates the economic losses for the colonists, who sometimes had to depend on rations from the crown and had difficulty securing loans in view of the conflicts on the island. Existential and economic threats and the potential non-realization of imperial desire elicit a sublime discourse in Anderson's writing. And by sublime, I'm simply talking about this language that denotes feelings of dread, awe, and sometimes even terror. In attributing aquatic features to indigenous activities on St. Vincent, Anderson reveals that what terrifies him is precisely how the Garifuna, like the Connery River, liquefy the boundaries erected by the British surveyors. In spite of himself and the colonial imperatives for which he labors, Anderson's sublime language betrays a deep anxiety about the Garifuna's habit of making cartographic lines fluid, frustrating efforts both on land and on the page to delink Garifuna people from their native home. It is no wonder that, in retrospect, Anderson criticizes the boundaries established by the British in the Treaty of 1773 and their failure to limit indigenous people to spaces designed as Carib territory. He offers this alternative. The first should have been their location in a part of the island, the most remote from their friend and ancient allies in the French islands, both by sea and land. The second, their situation should have been such as to have been surrounded by the English inhabitants as much as possible, to have had an uninterrupted communication with the view of civilizing and attaching them to the English tongue, manners, and habits. Anderson wanted to separate indigenous people from the sea and force them to the frontiers of the island for practical reasons. Indigenous Vincentians augmented their militia with support from the French, and the sea facilitated a trade of goods and weapons with their neighbors in the archipelago. The Garifuna repeatedly thwarted Anderson's vision of containment, making the sea not a barrier, but a conduit for relationships that sustained their dominion of St. Vincent. Land also tells a different story about indigenous kinship ties and political networks on St. Vincent. In his campaign for genocide, Young weaponized Garifuna ethnogenesis to deny indigenous people their sovereign right to St. Vincent. According to Young, the Black Caribs comprised Negro outlaws, enslaved Africans who were shipwrecked on Bequia in 1675, and intermixed with indigenous people already on St. Vincent to form a nation. The designation Black Carib allowed Anderson, Young, and other colonists to classify the Garifuna as intruders, and even to assume the role of protector of an already dispossessed indigenous minority. As Melanie Newton has indicated, this racial taxonomy was visualized on paper when in the 1700s, Martinique's governor drew an imaginary line separating St. Vincent's leeward and windward side called the Bar de l'Isle. The French and British would later claim that this boundary was established to protect a true indigenous population from the Black Caribs on the windward side of St. Vincent. This ethnocartography did not represent an accurate picture of indigenous communities and kinship ties, and Anderson's own description of the indigenous militia contradicts that divide. Picturing the rebellion of 1795 at Dorsetshire Hill, Anderson writes, Here, the hordes of banditti from leeward and windward united in one numerous body in March 1795, with the determination of the total extirpation of the English inhabitants and spreading universal desolation and rapine throughout the island. A multiracial, multilingual, and sometimes multi-island coalition was a source of dread to the colonists. Anderson's reference to the numerous body also challenges the neat bifurcations of colonial understanding that attempted to separate indigenous Vincentians racially and politically, and counters the notion that yellow Caribs, quote, or Kalinagos were willing subjects to the crown. Indigenous people on St. Vincent disrupt empire also within the rhetorical campaigns against them in the First and Second Carib Wars. The volatile situation in St. Vincent elicited frantic exchanges between Britain, America, and the Caribbean, and forced Britain to revise their expectations and strategies for colonizing the island. In a letter dated April 1772, the Earl of Hillsborough raised an alarm over the hostile and rebellious Caribs to convince the War Office to send troops from North America and the Leeward Islands to reduce them to submission to His Majesty's government. In September of that same year, the Earl of Dartmouth, the Secretary of State for the Colonies, wrote to the Navy to intercept the Black Caribs' frequent intercourse with the islands of St. Lucia and Martinique. And again in October, the governor of Grenada echoed a similar cry that the Caribs were receiving arms and ammunition from St. Lucia and Martinique. These letters circulated between the War Office, the colonies, and the Navy, with the interlocutors excerpting and often referencing each other's writings. In 1795, Young repeated similar concerns and, acknowledging that he had underestimated Garifuna militia, requested permission to orchestrate his genocidal plan. These correspondences demonstrate that, at certain points, Garifuna exercise of their sovereignty on St. Vincent featured prominently in exchanges between Britain and the Americas. They also highlight Britain's inability to disrupt indigenous social and political networks. Like the Carib Track, created through one of the most impenetrable forests in St. Vincent, and which allowed indigenous people on the windward and leeward sides of the island to communicate with each other, maritime routes and technologies helped the Garifuna to create an alternative, imaginary geography that countered the limited and bounded geography of empire. In their use of dense forests and waterways to complicate European boundaries, indigenous people in St. Vincent ensured their presence as sophisticated actors in the same narratives and historical records that worked to systematize their erasure. I want to talk a bit now about how I present this history to my students. In a course titled Picturing Empire, I introduced Garifuna history to my students, not only for its historical significance, but also as a method or approach for engaging the past and with the colonial archive. Texts like Anderson's demonstrate the possibility for uncovering competing discourses, even within obvious colonial propaganda. Although Anderson, like Brunius in his painting, attempts to sidestep the ethics of slavery and indigenous exile and genocide, even claiming at one point that it's not his business to get into the merits and demerits of slavery, the presence and persistence of indigenous people on St. Vincent elicit a counter-discourse that makes Anderson return again and again to the very problems he works hard to avoid in his narrative. The Garifuna story offers students a way of reading against the colonial vocabulary, ways that honor the humanity and dignity of indigenous people. Having encountered this narrative of resistance, my students are primed to reconsider the colonial fictions that were part of their own educational experience that they might have accepted uncritically. For example, one student, and these are university students, reflected on his own acceptance of the Thanksgiving narrative when he was a student in high school. And the student began to question whose interests are served by this narrative, and how might indigenous voices challenge the Thanksgiving narrative. His research led him to center the perspectives of the Wampanoag tribe instead of repeating the official narrative. And the official narrative is the idea that the Thanksgiving story is one of a benign encounter between Europe and the Americas, right? A meeting of friends. My students also read across time and space, and they learn to see continuities between the past and the present. For example, they recognize patterns between the categorization of Black Caribs and yellow Caribs, and the way that in 1903, one US census in the Philippines categorized non-Christians and Christians as wild. Wild people were the non-Christians, no surprise there. So they recognize that although the idea, sometimes they're presented with the idea that colonialism is a thing of the past, they see the way that these patterns are reformed even in the present. Indigenous Vincentians impeded colonial expansion by resisting the inscription of imperial desires upon the landscape, and they transformed colonial discourses, such as Anderson's Natural History. The ruptures in Anderson's text signify alternative geographies and lifeways, generating in Anderson's text a dialogue of power and resistance, of refusal and recognition with and against European presence. Like Oya, Dorsetshire Hill, and the forested spaces that memorialize indigenous lifeways, Anderson's text bears out Garifuna agency. Moreover, Anderson's narrative affirms that indigenous Vincentians were not confined to the boundaries imposed by British surveyors, but made use of networks of land and seascapes, linking with neighbors in the Caribbean archipelago to preserve their way of life on St. Vincent. The island of St. Vincent, then, is an archive to counter the colonial narrative. Recognizing the centrality of land to indigenous ecologies of resistance should inform land management from Baliso to Oya, how we preserve these sites of memory, and how we care for indigenous communities on this island. At the end of his narrative, Anderson reflects on Chatier's death at the end of the war and the capture of Garifuna fighters. Anderson calls the surrendered a dreadful spectacle of distress and misery. He seems to inhabit the perspective of the exile who look with longing eyes upon their native woods and mountains that they would never see again. Although Anderson and others often fantasized about a future emptied of indigenous Vincentians, through our relationships with these spaces and communities, conversations like this one, artistic productions, we have the opportunity to offer counter visions, a living, breathing archive to challenge the colonial one, to participate in the making of another text. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ross. They tried to get rid of us. They did. But here we are. All we're concerned about now is for compensation for the atrocities. It must happen. So we've had two speakers, two beautiful topics that have some great similarities. I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 28, 29, 45, right, about 60 pads, and I know you've been writing your questions. We are now open for questions. You have two speakers, two presenters to choose from. Your questions, please. You can also make comments, if you wish. Behind you. So Dr. Denny would go first.
Wonderful presentations both.
Power on. Right.
Yeah, wonderful presentation both. I thank you very much. I have 3 questions, and one each, okay? And then one, I suppose you could treat it as for the panel. And the first question has to do with, for the first presenter, it's how do we construct the Garifuna? Okay. When we think of the Garifuna, you know, normally we think of the union of African and South American genetics within St. Vincent, and hence we have the Garifuna, and so on. But I am wondering whether, in fact, our definition of the Garifuna might be somewhat, narrow. I'm wondering if there's a political and ideological dimension that should be included in our definition of the Garifuna. So here's the question. So here's this guy from Barbados, gets into St. Vincent, okay? By whatever means, he's escaping these, the terror that we have in Barbados in, like, say, 1679, or maybe, 1700. We got to get from Barbados because things rough there. So he arrives in St. Vincent, and he runs into this beautiful woman.
Naturally.
He likes the woman. She likes him. They decide we can do something together. He decide, okay, yes, we're going to do something together. I can be your husband. You will be my wife. Question, is he Garifuna? That's the question, okay? And question 2. So here's this Anderson, perhaps, or is it someone else? But they're looking at Oweah, and they're looking at the abundance of fishes and the beautiful waters, and they're, writing these, paradisal images of what they're seeing. Is he lying? Or is, in fact, do we have an ecological paradise which, despite, the colonial ambitions of the British, he can do nothing else but acknowledge? Okay, so that's yours. Okay. And the one for the panel is this. If I understand our second presenter properly, there's a racialized vocabulary that Young employs when he speaks of the Black Caribs. And he does this, I think you said designated vocabulary or something to that effect. Okay. And it seems to me that you are exceedingly cautious about the use of this vocabulary. I'm not entirely certain that your co-panelist is as cautious as you are. Is she wrong?
Very interesting. Very interesting. Panelists?
Thank you very much, Dr. Denny, for those questions. And you're touching complex and sensitive topics. And yesterday we mentioned the right to self-determination. It's who is Garifuna? I mean, I've been asked this question so many times, and who are we today to know exactly who was Garifuna then? First, the word Garifuna came pretty late. So the historical reference that we have of the people in the documents, in the French documents, are also about Caribs and Black Caribs. Now, earlier on, we had the presentation from a lady from Martinique who mentioned Aimé Césaire. And Aimé Césaire is big in the movement of negritude, where he takes over the word Negro and he makes it a pride rather than rather than a bad word in the West. So he re-identified the word, and it became a big political movement of the first actually French Black intellectuals, and there's other African presidents that joined him. And that's why I'm maybe also less cautious when I use these words. Well, first, because it's complex. And in the historical documents, we will use Caribs and Black Caribs, but I think that for me personally, it's up to us as well to change the meaning of words also. Yes, names were given by Europeans. I mean, it happened in many ways, many different contexts. But then it's up to you to do what you want with them. It's either you take the bad part of them and you feel bad about it and you fight for it, or you just give it a new version and a new identity, and people can recognize themselves. Because, I mean, we still use the word Carib here in St. Vincent too, and for years it's been a very derogatory word. But I think it's also up to people to change that. And as Aimé Césaire said, yes, I am a Negro and I will always be one. Well, then, stand up and say, well, I'm a Carib and I will always be one. And in a way that sometimes, again, we can give a different power to words. And you're right, the words are very important. Is that man Garifuna? I mean, personally for me, the mix with the Kalinago actually occurred pretty early. And then after, it was more of a maroon society that we called Black Caribs, from my research. But then again, here again, I can be wrong.
Dr. Denny, are you satisfied that she was precise Thank you. Next question. Go ahead.
All right, so I'll try to respond to both of your questions. So for the first question, I suppose you're asking whether Anderson was embellishing, or to what extent can we say that these fantasies in his writing were true, right? In his description of Oya. Right. So the first time that I shared this paper, when it was in its development, I shared it with one of my colleagues who is from the United States. And she read it and she said, "No, I want to go to St. Vincent." And I joked, well, maybe Anderson should be the Minister of Tourism. No shade to the current Minister of Tourism, but he's kind of using this language, which is not unique really to the 18th century or to narratives like this one, right? As I suggested in my talk earlier, Anderson's borrowing from this long tradition of writing about places and kind of like fantasizing about these places as paradise, right? When Mandeville, who's the medieval, the fictional character in the medieval text that I quoted earlier, was writing about Jerusalem and the East, they actually thought of the East as a lost Eden, right? This idea that here is where we can reclaim paradise. Colonists saw that too in places like St. Vincent and the rest of the Caribbean. When Anderson talks about the fish kind of just being easily procured in Oya, I would have to defer to people who fish in Oya, so I can attest to that. So I hope that answers your question. And then to the second question about terminology. I am cautious because I know that the word Carib within the documents that I examine has not been a neutral term. And when it has been used in a way that is derogative. There's links between Carib and cannibalism, right? There's a way in which it evokes that whole narrative of, Shakespeare's Caliban, right? Eater of flesh. And usually when you read that word Carib within these narratives, it's usually linked with the idea of being wild and savage. So that's why I avoid the term. I understand that people can choose to use terms that they want to, and language is evolving, right? People can challenge these discourses by rethinking how they use language, but just kind of like thinking about my own positionality, I don't think it's my place to say how. I don't think it's my place to say that I will keep using the word Carib or Black Carib. And so I avoid it in my writing unless I'm referring specifically to the historical documents.
Thank you very much. The third question. There were three questions. You've answered the three? Yes, they all answered. Beautiful. Just for the information, Oya is beautiful. It's a very deep bay. It's teeming with fish in Oya and the general location, so much so that the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines found it necessary to construct a fisheries complex in Oya. Okay? So there you have it. I want to thank both presenters for your efforts this afternoon, Ms. Vanessa Demission and Dr. Felisa Ross, Baines Ross. Thank you very much for your contributions to the Garifuna Heritage Foundation program for this year. And we look forward to having you again. I'd like to extend, on behalf of the people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, I'd like to extend an invitation to Dr. Ross to make an educational visit with your students to the land of Garifuna. Okay? Do that. So we're going to move on to our next session, and I'd like to invite Dr. Denny to introduce the presenter for this session. Dr. Denny.
Good evening, everyone. It is my great honor to invite our Prime Minister to speak to us about the acquisition of Baliso. And I have written about Baliso and spoken about Baliso for at least 3 years, 4 years. Okay. And I have spoken to the Prime Minister about Baliso as well. Okay. And I want to begin my introduction of the Prime Minister, or maybe prefacing whatever he has to say, with my own reflection on the acquisition of Baliso. I'm not going to be like forever. I grant you that. Okay, but in 1933, which is a very long time ago, a Belgian priest, mathematician, and physicist coined a concept in a language that was incredible. He called it the day when there was no yesterday. A moment of creation, an extraordinary, pivotal time when everything changes. The day when there was no yesterday. The universe comes into existence, and everything flows after that. The planets, the galaxies, you and me, and everything else. Okay? And so, when I think of Baliso, and I spoke with the Prime Minister some time ago, and he said, there's March the 5th, and then there's after March the 5th. And so it reminded me of the Belgian priest, the day when there was no yesterday. A pivotal moment, an extraordinary moment. Of course, in the instance of Baliso, we had yesterdays. We had 200 years. In fact, when I wrote last year about the announcement, I said, I'm reminded of Bonnie Wailer's song of dry bones crying in the wilderness. And that in Baliso, we had 2,000 bones crying in the wilderness. And that this moment that the Prime Minister presaged for us about a year ago, and which he has brought into reality now, that it would in fact the bones out of the wilderness. That the sacredness, the opportunity to commune with the ancestors, to give reverence to the dead, and to understand that we had genocide in plain sight. All of these are worthy of remembering when we think of Baliso and the reclamation that we now have, the return of, or the reclaiming of our patrimony, our ownership of this space, that we would do with it as we wish. And so I am thinking that the Jews, they speak about Auschwitz. And in the US, we have the Holocaust Memorial. And there are other places where there are pilgrimage, sacred spaces, monuments of conscience, where we have to remember the past. We have nothing like this within the Caribbean until now. until now. And so I bring to you the Prime Minister with the simple reminder that March the 5th would be forever remembered. There was the day before March the 5th. The 4th. And then we have March the 5th. Everything changes. Thank you so much.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, friends from St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and those who have come to us from abroad, but who are Vincentians and those who are not Vincentians, Garifuna, Kalinago, people of the world. I'm very happy to be here with you this afternoon. I want to thank the Garifuna Heritage Foundation for inviting me to come to speak today. And it was a treat to hear Vanessa and Felicia. Felicia is actually from South Rivers, from my constituency. Felicia is actually my family. Her mother is a defreitas and related to me. So I just want to, she gave you other kinds of history, I will give you some also. And I'm really pleased to see us all gathered here at the University of the West Indies Global Campus. It's a beautiful setting. Very happy that the Garifuna Heritage Foundation, an organization of real authenticity, has continued over the years, the last decade, to present this convocation, persons to reflect upon our history, and particularly on the Garifuna and the Kalinago. For persons who may not know it, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines pays for this building. It isn't owned by us. It's owned by the University of the West Indies. It's the cost, $6 million US, 16 million Eastern Caribbean dollars. And we, in order for the university to have received a loan from the Caribbean Development Bank to build this facility, it required that we guarantee, the government of St. Vincent, the St. Vincent and Grenadines guaranteed the loan, which we did. And subsequently, we decided that we will pay the loan. So I'm very happy to have been part of the decision so that we can have a facility of this kind in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And I want to thank the head of the Global Campus Local Division, Dr. Mark Barnett, for the excellent work that she has been doing, and of course her predecessors. Thanks very much. It's with the craziness which is going on all over the world, particularly in North America, it is good to be here talking about matters touching and concerning our lives, our living, and our production. I want to begin by reading a few documents, because I've been asked to speak on Baliso and its location within reparations. And there are many books and articles, the like, written on it. But I have been a participant in this venture. And I'm an old man. I don't know how many more years that I have remaining on this side of eternity. I'm old but strong in spirit. And I had a conversation with Peter at the gate, and he thinks I would make 110 like Isaac, son of Abraham. So whatever number I get. I want to read the document that brought Baliso into our possession, in our control, our patrimony. I think I'll start, Dr. Denny, at the end. Back, and then I'll go forward. Simple document, Government Gazette. Of Tuesday, March the 4th, volume 158, number 13 this year. And I have some copies to give you. I brought copies. It's a notice in the matter of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 322, and in the matter of the acquisition by the Governor General of the parcel of land at Baliso in the parish of the Grenadines, Declaration of Acquisition of Land, second publication. Under the law, the second publication, this land is acquired and returns to our patrimony. So on the day this was published, it is the day on which it was returned to the patrimony of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Governor General, of course, is the formal head of state. The decisions are taken by the cabinet. And these are things done by the Governor General in the formal way. Whereas it is enacted by Section 3 of the Land Acquisition Act, Chapter 322, that if the Governor General considers that any land should be acquired for a public purpose, he may cause a declaration to that effect to be made. And whereas it is considered by the Governor General that the undermentioned parcel of land should be acquired for a public purpose, to wit, the purpose of a cultural, historical, memorial site, and to keep as part of our national patrimony. Now it is hereby declared by Her Excellency the Governor General, acting in accordance with the advice of the Cabinet of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, that upon the second publication of this acquisition in the Gazette, the lands shall vest absolutely in the Crown, all that portion of lands situated at Baliso in the parish of the Grenadines, in the state of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, belonging to whom it may concern, at measuring approximately 323 acres, together with all ways, water and watercourses rights, lights, liberties, privileges, paths, easements, and all appurtenances thereon shall vest absolutely in the Crown. This is how the deed was done. This is the matter which has brought Baliso into our patrimony. Important for the record that the process was initiated formally, the commencement of the process on January the 2nd, 2024. It was authorized by the Cabinet of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to write the Chief Surveyor, Mr. Keith Francis, on this matter. Dear Chief Surveyor, subject. Notice the date, January the 2nd, 2024. Acquisition of Baliso by the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Further to my oral conversation, instructions on the above caption matter, I state the following. 1. It is the intention of the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines to acquire Baliso as a cultural historic memorial site from the supposed fee simple owners as per the law and constitution of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. 2. Upon such a development. 4. Almost every year, around March 14th, the anniversary of the death of His Right Excellent Joseph Chateau, a national hero, agencies acting on behalf of the presumed owners of Baliso or those with an interest to profit from the sale of Baliso agitate our people unnecessarily with astronomical asking prices for Baliso, completely unrealistic. 5. The declaration by my government not to grant any foreigner as purchaser an alien landholding license for Baliso or to permit any development contrary or inimical to the historic cultural requisites. 6. On the nearby island of Batawia, no development whatsoever will be permitted. It will be kept as a bird sanctuary or natural habitat. I spoke to Mr. Stephen Huggins, lawyers for the quote-unquote owners of Baliso, a few days ago about this matter. I informed him that the chief surveyor will be in touch with him for discussions relating to possible purchase if there is an agreement or acquisition if there is no agreement. Clearly, the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines must ascertain that Mr. Huggins' clients actually have good title to Baliso. I am sure that the Attorney General will assist you in this regard. Meanwhile, I'm requesting that a relevant valuation be done soonest. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines considers this matter to be one of urgency. I'm hopeful that the transaction can be effected before March the 14th, 2024. All the best to you, your family, and the staff for 2024. And I signed this and copied it to the Attorney General, the Minister of Lands, who's the Deputy Prime Minister and himself, Garifuna, and also the Minister of Finance. Unfortunately, the public servants responsible for providing the valuation did not do so in time for me to effect this matter last year. Thus, it was delayed for this year. Now, I go to another date. I'm going to set the record in relation, that's Baliso, and I'll come back to it. Reparations. This letter is dated May the 6th, 2013. The letter by me to His Excellency Erwin LaRocque, Secretary General of the Caribbean Community Secretariat, CARICOM, in Guyana. Dear Secretary General, subject, issue of reparations for July 2013 meeting of heads of state and government of CARICOM. It is this letter which triggered the placement of reparations on the agenda of CARICOM. The issue had been discussed hitherto. But the matter came to a head when this government put this issue on the agenda of the heads of state and government of CARICOM. This is to the Secretary General I'm writing. As you are aware, the call for reparations for native genocide and slavery for the descendants and member states of CARICOM has been growing in intensity and with urgency across the Caribbean and its diaspora. Several countries in the Caribbean, including Antigua and Barbuda, Barbados, Guyana, Jamaica, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and Suriname, have set up national reparations committees or commissions. I suggest that one outcome of the heads' deliberations on this matter ought to be the establishment of a CARICOM Reparations Commission to drive the issue. This matter encompasses legal, moral, political, and diplomatic dimensions. The reparations issue arose sharply at the United Nations World Conference Against Racism, Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Related Intolerance in Durban, South Africa at the end of August 2001. Subsequently, there has been an outpouring of literature on the subject. Recently, Professor Hilary Beckles, principal of the Cave Hill campus, University of the West Indies, has written a compelling book entitled Britain's Black Debt, Reparations for Caribbean Slavery and Native Genocide. I did the review at the launch of the book at UWI, Mona, Jamaica on May the 2nd, 2013. I feel sure that Professor Beckles would make available to each head of state or government of CARICOM a copy of the book. My secretary is sending you a copy of my review. You may make the review available to the heads also. Professor Beckles has agreed to prepare a brief paper on reparations to support the agenda item at the Heads' Conference in July 2013. I'm taking the liberty of copying this letter to Professor Beckles. Sincerely yours, Ralph. And then, and the documents before CARICOM at the 34th regular meeting of Conference of Heads of Government of the Caribbean Community in Port of Spain, Trinidad, and Tobago between the 4th and 6th of July 2013. Item 12 on the agenda read, the issue of reparations for native genocide and slavery requested by the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And the note before the documentation reads, the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dr. the Honorable Ralph Gonsalves, has written to the Secretary General in a letter dated May the 6th, 2013, which is the letter I just read, on the matter of reparations for native genocide and slavery for the descendants and member states of CARICOM. The Prime Minister has requested that the issue be placed on the agenda for the 34th regular meeting and has suggested that one outcome of the discussions on this matter could be the agreement on the establishment of a CARICOM Reparations Commission to drive the issue. The proposal of the Honorable Prime Minister is set against the backdrop of a book written by Professor Hilary Beckles entitled Britain's Black Debt, Reparations for Caribbean Slavery and Native Genocide. Set out as attachments 1 and 2 to this agenda are the submissions prepared by Professor Beckles to facilitate the deliberations of heads of government on this matter, and the review of Professor Beckles' book by the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. That is how this matter has come about. I need to put it on record because I haven't spoken in this way before, but this is an important year when everybody's seeking to position themselves hither and thither and want to elevate themselves more and diminish others. It's the first time I put it in the way I put the record, but this is a conference dealing with history. Then, another letter, January the 14th, 2014. This is again to the Secretary General of CARICOM. I am now in January 2014, the chair of CARICOM. So, in May, I wrote the letter, May 2013. I prepared the way for the July meeting, 2013. The government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines hosted a conference here on reparations in September 2013. If you wish to read about it, you can read. I made a speech at the opening of that conference at Victoria Park. The whole of Caribbean and other countries from the world came, where that reparations conference, the first one. And then in January 2014, I became chairman of CARICOM because it's rotated every 6 months. There are 14 of us, so I get to be chairman every 7 years. And you know, I've been around quite a long time, so that I've done a lot of it, chairing. It's now like second nature. But on this occasion, and on every occasion, I take my responsibilities seriously. I wrote the chairman, I wrote the Secretary General this, so that he would know, under my leadership over the 6 months of my chairmanship, the issues upon which I would be focusing. Solidarity greetings from the government and people of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. First, I thank you and my colleague, heads of state and government of the member states of the Caribbean community, most sincerely for the kindness, generosity, and community solidarity shown in practical terms towards St. Vincent and the Grenadines immediately after our Christmas disaster 2013 and continuing. For those who didn't know, on Christmas Eve 2013, we had a terrible natural disaster here. 9 persons died. And there was vision loss amounting to 20% of the gross domestic product of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And though we were in the early stages of rebuilding, we have to deal with large strategic issues also. So I am putting pen to paper to the Secretary General and this was sent to all the heads of government of CARICOM and the Director General of the OECS. I went on to say, I take this as a further engendering of an overriding commitment of all of us in our Caribbean to love and care for CARICOM and each other. To me, this is our primary obligation and the top priority of CARICOM on an ongoing basis. And that's what it is to love and care for CARICOM and to care for each other. And we must do so on an ongoing basis. I said, but there are other priorities. As I begin my chairmanship of CARICOM, in difficult national circumstances, and in a regional and international context fraught with economic uncertainty, existential threats arising from climate change, multiple exogenous challenges, and homegrown regional burdens, I consider it necessary and desirable to map out succinctly the central themes on our CARICOM agenda over the next 6 months and continuing. This bundle of major issues familiar to all of us and on which urgent continued action is required include, and I listed 12 of them, climate change, energy, citizen security, regional ANC transport, the regional economy, challenges, CSME, wealth creation, job creation. 6, implementing community law on the freedom of movement of CARICOM nationals. 7, the final resolution of the BICO and CLICO issues. 8, the wellness revolution, the battle against chronic non-communicable diseases. 9, education and ICT. 10, external trade, especially the trade agreement with Canada. 11, an OECS carve-out in CARICOM. And 12, a better coordination of foreign policy. I went on then to say, there are 2 other issues which we cannot reasonably avoid for focused attention. And I listed 4 of them. 1, the quest for reparations for native genocide and African slavery. 2, the denationalization of persons of Haitian descent in the Dominican Republic. 3, the decriminalization of medical marijuana and possible further legislative reform in respect of limited quantities for religious and recreational uses. We also put that on the agenda regionally. And 4, the facilitation of improved Cuba-USA relations. That is still on the agenda, as you know, even more so than ever before. I went on to say, crisscrossing all of these matters is the state of community governance in CARICOM. I do not need to rehash the constellation of considerations here. I note simply that this is a hardy perennial which we must swiftly resolve if sustainable progress is to be made on the priorities which I have identified. And then I went on and thanked my predecessor in the office and so on and so forth. As I say, and we're going forward, said, in this I take inspiration from the book of Isaiah. God gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not go weary. They will walk and not be faint. On our collective journey, let us not be faint-hearted. I said, please give my warmest regards to all at the Secretariat. I look forward eagerly to receiving you and my colleague, heads of state and government at the CARICOM Intersessional Conference in St. Vincent and the Grenadines on February the 24th, 2014. This is part of the work which we have been doing on behalf of the people on these related matters. Now, there are other documentation, but I think that is sufficient to see, to show the people here gathered, those who are listening, the determination of this government to handle the issues which I have just highlighted on a continuing basis for ourselves today, for tomorrow. We are all time. Yet only the future is ours to desecrate. The present is the past, and the past, our fathers' mischiefs. The poet didn't say our mothers, said our fathers' mischiefs. So what we have to do now is how do we move forward? You know, I was listening, if you permit me, I showed Felicia. She wrote about the writings of Mr. Mr. Anderson. He's writing in the late 18th century. I'm going to read something from someone who is writing in 1827. F.W. Bailey. Bailey came to the Caribbean, and he wrote a book entitled 4 years residence in the West Indies. And I found this book in the library at a monastery, Mount St. Benedict. People in St. Vincent and the Grenadines are familiar with the fact that I went and spent in 2005, I lived with Benedictine monks for 10 days and trying to examine myself to see if I can be a better person than I am and to see if I can correct weaknesses and to see if I can enhance my strengths and possibilities. I have a judgment about it. Other people would have other judgments. But the most important judgment of all awaits us much later. But this is what Mr. Bailey, I found this book. They have a splendid library at the monastery. A lot of old books. So you could imagine that I spent a lot of time. I not only did that, but I had to do my part in working in the garden, like the other monks. I had to do everything like what they did. But this is what Bailey said. His political and social views, they repel. I mean, they're awful. Just like what you've been talking about. But he made some observation on other matters that are interesting. This is what he wrote on approaching the landmass of St. Vincent. This is 1827. This is after the genocide. And I was very interested in the issue of land. All sorts of reasons, including the cultivation of the land itself as an act of independence and self-determination to distinguish it from what was seeking to be imposed upon persons. This is what he says, because it answers in part the question you ask, whether the place was so idyllic, grubby, whether the fellow was a lion. This is what Bailey said, B-A-Y-L-U-I. Quote, people say a great deal about the Alps and the Pyrenees and the romantic and beautifully soft scenery of Italy. And heaven forbid that I have not seen, heaven forbid that who have not seen should pretend to detract from the praise which all who have acknowledged them to merit. I may, however, be permitted to state that my conviction that there is no scenery in Italy, nor the world, that can surpass either in beauty or interest. He continued, I will not attempt to describe the many beauties we beheld. As we passed along the coast, suffice it to say that for verdure and freshness, for grandeur and sublimity, that word, the sublime, again, sublimity, for the contrast of cultivated valleys with uncultivated mountains, for variety of foliage and effect of light and shade, I saw nothing before, and I have seen nothing since equal to it. And then, I hope there's no Bajan here. Is there any Bajan here? He then goes on. He is not so nearly generous to Barbados. He said, the approach to Barbados presents nothing to equal the grandeur and sublimity which mark out the beautiful little islands of St. Vincent and Grenada as preeminent in the cluster to which they belong. Now, there's all this beauty, but British colonialism was contriving and did contrive to corrupt it with awful ugliness. let us pause as to see what it was like. Both of you looked at what has transpired there in different perspectives. Trained in political economy, and I have been involved all my life in struggles, and therefore I look at the contradictions which take place and about struggles. And because of those things, I have concluded that it was my lot in life to prefer a strenuous life than to one of ignoble ease. So give me the stress. Put it for me. That was the good Lord has set out for me. The longest guerrilla war against colonialism in the Western Hemisphere took place in St. Vincent and the Grenadines between 1764 and 1795. It wasn't a continuous one in the sense that battle every day, but there was a guerrilla war going on, interspersed with so-called peace treaties, which the British broke on every occasion, and the war had to continue over and over again. They took independence from us. That's why in all my speeches, people ask me, why is this thing where you don't talk about the grant of independence? I say we reclaimed our independence in 1979 as we are seeking to reclaim our past and to look at ourselves through the prism of our. There is no country in the Caribbean, no, in CARICOM, the English, French speak, whatever kind of Caribbean, none, in which there were black people here, African people, before slavery. I believe the history, which is being written currently by Professor Denny, and Dr. Thomas is here, yes. Dr. Fraser is not here, but I know he's around sometime, and also Dr. Scott, who is in Barbados at the University of the West Indies. You can look at every other country. There was no slavery in St. Vincent and the Grenadines until the British came and established it in 1764, when they brought the first set of enslaved African bodies to this country. But there were black people here, there were African people here before the enslavement of African bodies by the British. Where did they come from? Well, first of all, as Dr. Denny said, a man comes from Barbados to St. Vincent. Well, he puts it in a humorous way, but the fact of the matter, Barbados was a slave colony in 1630. And Barbados is flat as a pancake. There's nowhere to run and hide. No bush, no mountain. So that when you wanted to run away, the nearest place was St. Vincent. It's 100 miles away. And there were canoes. And people came here. Now, if you are in slavery and you get out of it, you're going to fight like hell. You would rather die than get back in it. So when they came and they met Kalinago brothers and sisters, and naturally, we all are animals, we are not plants, we do mate. And offspring would come from human beings who mate. Well, animals mate. You're just at the higher end of the chain, the practical matter. See, she's smiling. She would have listened to me when she was a little girl. She was born in 1985, and she would have seen me. She would have heard me on the platform many, many times in South Rivers. I know she doesn't want me to say her age because she's so young and bright and, and beautiful and everything. I have to advertise her. I mean, don't, she doesn't like this. But these are privileges of an old man. No. So, they were here, persons from the 16th century, descendants. Some of them, no doubt, men and women who came over from Barbados, or women would have also come. They would have made it so you would have had, quote unquote, pure African. I'm talking by blood. You'd have Kalinago. And obviously you have the mixture, which subsequently, the name Garifuna as a nation name was provided. And then there was another set of persons who came from the shipwreck. And I think you would have unearthed that the French settlers who came, small numbers on the western side of St. Vincent. I think they occupied about 3,000 acres of land. The Kalinago and the Garifuna allowed them to occupy them. And they brought their own quote-unquote slaves. But they were on lands. Their bodies were enslaved, but they were not within a slave society. And I read the draft, your first draft, and I saw you made that point very powerfully. Made that point very powerfully, Dr. Denny. I read all this stuff, and if I don't give credit to every particular point, it's because I'm not giving a lecture I'm not giving a talk as an academic. I'm giving it as somebody who is interested in just simply asserting the truth. But I can find references for everything what I am saying. So, so there were persons, there were Africans here before slavery was established. Remember the first point about the guerrilla war? Second one about Africans here before slavery. Third, before the Emancipation Act of 1833, the only place where you have persons who are African or of African descent, meaning Garifuna, who are never slaves, were in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. I want you to get that. I want you to get that. That before the Emancipation Act of 1833, the only place where you found Africans and persons of African descent, meaning Garifuna, Africans and then Africans descent, who were not slaves and did not allow themselves to be slaves, was in the St. Vincent and the Grenadines. These are three important lessons from our history. For the future. When I say on the political platform that I was born with a rebel seed, I was a young rebel and today I'm an old rebel. Because there's a lot to rebel about. I'm a wiser and older rebel now. There are three approaches in our history which we can follow strategically. One, there's an approach of rolling over and playing dead. The people walk all over you. Well, those who want to do that, die me. Secondly, you can resist. You have to resist in the complicated world creatively. Or you can do something in between where you think you're resisting, but it's not a strategy, it's purely a tactic in your process of allowing yourself to roll over and play dead. Those are the three. Those are the three. Now, the one about resisting creatively, you acknowledge that though the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, I never know anybody could climb Suffolk Mountain in a straight line. You have to take zigs, you have to take zags, but when you take your zig and your zag, you don't end up in a cul-de-sac. You don't end up in a dead end. You keep your eye going to the mountain top. Of course, in our Caribbean, especially, and there's no better system that I know, one of competitive democracy. You always, when you're going to the mountaintop, there are always people who want to keep you into a cul-de-sac and tell you it's better there, you know. Get rid of the Cubans. Let them take your visa. Don't give up your visa. Now, who want to do that can do that. Not me. I'm picking no fight with anybody. I don't like to pick fights with people. Now, in 1795, what was the population like here? Dr. Denny, you're the historian. The Garifuna and the Kalinago, the different people estimated it was about 9,000 people. Some say 10, some say a little less. But you must have had, though there was no census, you must have had 20-something thousand enslaved African bodies. Because I count using the database, the slave trade database by Emory University. Emory University has a slave database. Between 1764 and 1795, 55,258 enslaved African bodies landed in St. Vincent. Sorry, embarked, and a number 10% less came to St. Vincent because of the deaths in the Middle Passage. And given the rate at which they were dying, the enslaved African bodies, it wouldn't be unreasonable to think, Robbie, that maybe 20-something thousand enslaved African bodies that have been here. So you had a reasonable population size, you know. The number would have been somewhere over 40,000 or close to that, because you had Europeans. And when Châteaubriand when the resistance was defeated in 1795, that would have been more or less the situation. Canary River beautiful, except when it rains in plenty up in Canary Mountain, when you overflow its banks, when it's vicious. Oh yeah, fish, nice. You know, every place thing, but they up down such a hill. The British triumphed, defeated the Garifuna resistance, Garifuna and Kalinago. By the way, I found in the Bailey's book Bailey was passed through here 32 years or so after Chateaubriand's death. And if Major Leith, and the people whom he communicated with when you read that book, if Major Leith had actually killed him, Bailey would have written it down. But what struck me, Professor Denny, was this. He made no reference to Leith and Chateaubriand involved in anything at all. After describing the military engagement at Satcher Hill between the English and the Charibs, Charibes. By the way, I think if you look it up linguistically, I found it somewhere that it comes from a North Phoenician term meaning fierce and warlike. Charib, yes, meaning fierce and warlike. So you come from England, you take my land, I'm fierce and warlike, but we call ourselves Kalinago. In our language, that meant the peaceful ones. If you thief my land, what do you want me to do? You want me to fight for my land? You see how people fight for 100 square foot of land. Much as them fellas come for all 96,000 acres in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Eh? That's the reality, you know. And all hell broke loose after the British declared in 1764 that all lands belonged to the British Crown. Before that, you're uneasy to see so many of them around. You saw them with plenty guns. When they came in 1763, they didn't look like the fellas who had come earlier. They came for business. They came with a lot of guns, and I've advised they had a lot of Bibles too. You know, I love the Bible. I'm just saying, they came with guns and they also came with Bibles. But this is how Bailey described it. Many who sought shelter in the barracks were put to the sword, and Chateaubriand, their chief, was killed with a few more Charibs and French inhabitants. That's his description 32 years later when he talked to the fellas. Of course, he wrote in this book, as is written in many, many records, and it's available in Parliament in Britain. Fellas didn't know. They asked many questions of the Prime Minister in England, of the Foreign Secretary. Explain to us. You say that these people are savages. Explain to us how you can't defeat yet These savages, and we have the most powerful army in the world. It is the same question. It is the same question the American people asked during Lyndon Johnson period. You have the most powerful army in the world, yet the Vietnamese are defeating you. If money and guns were everything, the Americans would not have lost the war in Vietnam, which is an important lesson as we go forward. You know, one of the things in our society, I've been using the expression more and more. I got the expression, I was looking for a particular expression, I found it in Albert Hirschman's work, development economist, originally from Germany, but worked in Latin America. Hidden rationalities. Things within our society and economy which are hidden, they're submerged, badly utilized, ill-utilized, or not utilized at all. That's why people wonder how is it we have all this creativity with mass men and regular artists and so on and so forth. Ordinary folks. There are hidden rationalities there. Now, in 1800, I think you recorded that in the draft which I read, the Caribs couldn't own, as it is put it. The Caribs, I don't use Caribs unless you're quoting them. The Caribs couldn't own land. The British say, no, you can't own land. Because there was a determination. And William Young had written about. They say, the way things are in St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you can't have the British and you can't have the Garifuna. You can't get rid of one. Either British leave or you kill out or banish the Garifuna. And the fellas did that. You know, we in St. Vincent and Grenadines, even within the reparations movement, we have to be talking a lot. When people talk about reparations for enslaved African bodies, 100%. But I always ask my brothers and sisters in the struggle to put up front reparations for native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies. Because we have a very special history. And in the struggle for reparations, there is a special place for us. Think of this. 9,000 people. Let's take that. Some people say a little bit more, some say a little bit less. When you read the literature, the estimates, Professor, you go up to 10. Okay, some go to 10. I even say I will take 9. I'll take 9. Nearly 5,000 were taken to Baliso. Half of them died. The other half gone to or taken to Rotan Island. And descendants of them are here. It is also estimated that those who remained, those who were put in the inhospitable area in the north, east, and like in Greg's and down at Rosebank, maybe maximum, you had 2,000. Robbie. So what you kill during battle, or immediately afterwards, when it was indiscriminate. Hear what Bailey said? Bailey said, many who sought shelter in the barracks were put to the sword. They just killed people indiscriminately. In fact, and they did such killing up to 1800. And there were instances beyond. But the history shows even up to 1800, because there were remnants of the struggle still after the defeat of the resistance. So you're telling me now, you wipe out 80% through killing people, either directly or starving them in Baliso. Let's understand this, for our American brothers and sisters who are here. The only thing which could have survived on Baliso is guana and lizard, Iguana and lizard, we call them guana. And very interestingly, in Rotan Island, the only thing which could have survived then, iguana and lizard, But yet, Rotan Island is now a developed touristic site. Well, Baliso will not develop into a touristic site. The data. You can't talk about this thing. When I talk about it, as a boy, I spent a lot of time north of the Dry River. I'm from the East Coast. I was an Onwe boy. But I told you I was a rebel. My mother always sent looking for me where I gone. She can't find me. I took very much to heart what I had learned in Sunday school. When Christ was 12 years old and Mary and Joseph couldn't find him, it was about my father's business. I took that very much to heart. It didn't matter how much my mommy beat me, that I'm own way. You couldn't change me. I still was own way. I still own way. I still own way. I still own way. But here it is. Let me see who. On Baliso, between July the 26th, 1796, and February the 2nd, 1797, the source that I have, 4,776 persons were taken to Baliso. 4,776. And they consisted of, most of them overwhelmingly were Garifuna, 4,633, 102 Kalinago, and 41 enslaved African bodies. They probably were in solidarity. So they report for the storm. When they're wrong, they don't know. There were 2,003 women. 1,080 men. They were determined. And most of these women were strong, fertile women. They were determined. Man could have picked another woman, but we were determined to take plenty. We wanted to wipe the Garifuna off the face of St. Vincent. That's what the colonialists were saying. And these wicked people, 1,693 children. Tell me, we mustn't have. You could read about it. I write it in this book. You can. It's called The Case for Caribbean Reparatory Justice. It's on Amazon. Actually, strange enough, my secretary just brought me a check. I have some books on Amazon. I got some royalties. So I felt in a good mood coming up here. Because a little bit of jingle in my pocket would help me. And those on the journey to Rotan, 222 died. And those who arrived were 1,362 women and children and 664 men. 2,000 something in all arrived. Now, this issue of reparations, there are some persons, let's begin to say this. You can't identify the individual descendants to give them money for reparations. That's a almost impossible historical task. And we are in social solidarity. We want the reparations for native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies, not to give out individual money like how the right-wing press puts it. It is to repair the legacy of underdevelopment as a consequence of native genocide and the enslavement of African bodies. We have a senator from the parliament here, from above the river, from the opposition, former school teacher. We have persons from all over who are here. They know when they're growing up. You can't drive across the Rabuka Dry River because there was no road. Or you drive on the floor at the dry river, but you had a stream. And when the rain comes in the mountain, nobody can cross. It has washed away vehicles, it killed people. We built that. This government. And because you had to unite the people over the river, largely Garifuna communities, Kalinago Garifuna communities, with the rest of the nation. And more than that, nobody was going to lend you money to build a house up there. No bank going to lend you money. Why must they lend you? Why is the resale value if you don't pay? The bank is not a charitable institution. But when you put a bridge there, as we have done, it makes it a bankable proposition. And you watch, and of course there are particular housing policies, you watch the beautiful houses from fancy all the way down. But we still have real pockets of poverty and poor housing. And we need reparations to help with that. There was no secondary school there before our time in government. There was no ambulance. The people who owned this land as a consequence of colonialism were put on the worst piece of land for productive purposes. I'm talking about for agricultural purposes. And historically, the poverty in those communities was the highest. have been the highest. The poverty has been the highest. And that's why the 10-point reparations plan for CARICOM, you can read it on the website. And this is being amended now. Full apology. Indigenous Peoples Development Program, funding for repatriation to Africa. The establishment, well, that one, funding from them for repatriation from the colonialists, for those who want to go back to Africa. I made it very easy with Ethiopia. In 2005, I paid a visit to Ethiopia, and I signed an agreement. Ethiopia is seen, at least for the Rastafarian brothers, as the spiritual home. We have a visa waiver agreement. We don't need any visa. Ethiopians don't need any visa to come to St. Vincent. We don't need any visas to go to Ethiopia. 4, the establishment of cultural institutions and the return of cultural heritage. 5, the assistance in remedying the public health crisis. 6, educational programs. 7, the enhancement of historical and cultural knowledge exchanges. 8, psychological rehabilitation as a result of the transmission of trauma. 9, the right to development through the use of technology. And 10, debt cancellation and monetary compensation. And this struggle, when we started in 2013, when I made this suggestion in 2013, the record will show. The historians could look it up. It's not the first time they said I'm a crazy man. They said I was crazy to talk about reparations. Yeah. Informed circles in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. They say, what about all the aid which you get before? You're going to deduct that? An accountant's mentality. Deal with a large strategic issue. I may not see the realization of reparations. Because I began by saying I'm an old man. I'm 78 years old. I ain't run out of juice yet, as you notice. I run out of juice yet. I may not live to see it. But I give you this commitment here. Now always rely on me to be in the trenches, in the fight, here in St. Vincent, Grenadines, and Caribbean, globally, for reparations, for native genocide, and the enslavement of African bodies. In the meanwhile, we have things we have to do. We have to look for all ways in which we can improve our people's lives, living, production. Specifically in relation to Baliso. I read that some ideas have come out of the discussions as to what you should have on Baliso. Everybody got their own view as to what should take place on Baliso. Government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines will put in place process for appropriate consultation, full consultation with the people of St. Vincent and Grenadines, and specifically for the Garifuna at home and abroad. We didn't include our brothers and sisters who in Belize, Honduras, Guatemala, Nicaragua, and those who are in the United States and other places all over the world, for us to put our ideas together as to what we should have a development, a particular plan for the development of Baliso. But from the perspective of what we have here, cultural, historic, memorial site, and to keep as part of our national patrimony. have to, and we will provide more details in that regard. I have ideas about it. You would be, but I don't want to impose my ideas. I want my ideas to be there. Vanessa ideas, I want Felicia ideas, I want Jones ideas, I want Chevron ideas, I want Grubby's ideas. I want everybody here and others. No. That is set up. We'll put a mechanism in place, something to go to the cabinet. But this is something which we can put up front to say we need reparations resources to make Baliso something in our own image and likeness as a cultural, historic site for the purposes of our memory and our going forward. It's going to cost a lot of money. Baliso has no infrastructure. I deal with water. We have to deal with electricity. Deal with roads. We have to deal with a good, decent port. Because the vessels have to go in there. You know it's difficult to get into Baliso. So it's going to cost a lot of money. But it's a great cause. Great causes have never been won by doubtful men and women, and I'm not doubtful. And I will do my part. And when I go to the people the next time, it would be in my manifesto, my election manifesto. It would be a pledge to the people. And I've done many big things before, and this is a huge one. I'm talking policy, I'm not talking politics. We have to continue the struggle for reparations. Just want to put another footnote to the record. Because I led the way at CARICOM, to establish the Reparations Commission. And we adopted the 10-point plan. But we also set up a prime ministerial subcommittee to have political oversight. And there are some colleagues who said, well, let St. Vincent and the Grenadines head the prime ministerial subcommittee. I said, no. I want Barbados to head it. And the reason why I said it is that I needed this not to be something which is St. Vincent focus because of Garifuna. I want it to be much wider. Of course, always the enslaved African bodies in St. Vincent, the reparations for that always is there, front and center. And I thought when I reviewed all the countries, I thought Barbados would be the most appropriate, and my recommendation was accepted. This is how Frondell Stewart became the first chair, and this is why my dear sister Mia, who's doing a good job, is now chair of it. Not in their personal capacity, but as the Prime Minister of Barbados. And I'm on that Prime Ministerial Subcommittee, helping to drive this process. I want to indicate that I have in the budget for allowances for members of the Reparations Commission, $100,000. You know, this year we have some money also for the decolonization of names. We have to deal with Young. We had to deal with Victoria. The Calypsonian Stalin, you know, had already addressed Victoria in a conversation with Peter in Calypso. Victoria never set foot in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Why should we have the Victoria Park named after Victoria in this day and age? I know people might not want to change Murray Village because Murray is a man who was involved in leading the fight against the spiritual Baptists in 1912, Gideon Murray. But we got to call it Murray Road. We could call it another road. I know as soon as I talk about these things, I don't leave them things that could put bread on people's table. You know that version of, you know how that goes? When we started with reparations, they say distracting people. You don't want to deal with unemployment. You don't want to deal with a health facility. You don't want to deal with injection here or there. You don't want to deal with the material in school. It's as though can't live by bread alone, you know. Can't live with something else too. And we have to see our future, the present and our future, through the prism of our own eyes. The descendants of Châteauguay, not better than anybody, but nobody in the world is better than them. In St. Vincent and the Grenadines and in this Caribbean, we have arrived at a point of a coherent, cohesive civilization. We have moved from a time when there was a culturally plural society in which each cultural, ethnic, or racial section had its own relatively distinct pattern of socio-cultural integration. We went through transitions, and we have arrived at a position of a more or less homogeneous society with scars from the past, but around a core set of tried and tested uplifting values of our civilization. We are the songs of the indigenous people, the Kalinago, the Garifuna, the Amerindian. We are the rhythm of Africa. We are the melody of Europe, we are the chords of Asia, and we are the homegrown lyrics of the Caribbean. Like in all symphonies, we will have dissonances. But those dissonances, we address them through the informal mechanisms of our evolved culture and values. And when we can't do it that way, which comes from the genius of our people, we do it through the parliament, and we do it through the law courts and through other formal institutions. But one thing for sure, we have a history of authenticity and nobility and legitimacy, and we have a trajectory for further advancement and ennoblement. Baliso. Welcome home, Baliso. You are part of this further and noble men. Thank you. I want to say one thing, and I wanted to do it after I was finished. There is in the audience 2 leaders, a particular leader and his associate from the colony of Bonaire, Dutch colony. I want him to stand, and I want his associate to stand. You know what? You know what the Dutch are doing in you know what the Dutch are doing in Bonaire? They're trying to remove the indigenous population. And they are sending in a lot of Dutch people to such an extent now that you have more Dutch people than indigenous people from Bonaire. They have been doing that gradually, and they're accelerating it. St. Vincent and the Grenadines has been working with the brothers and sisters in Bonaire. We've taken the matter to CARICOM. We're working with them at the United Nations. I was just there, I spoke to Ambassador King on the matter just 2 days ago. I was in New York. And what happened, they're not committing genocide against them by killing them as they did the British did in the 18th century. But they're emptying Bonaire of the indigenous people. We saw what happened in the Chagos Islands. And you may not realize this. The place in the world where you have more colonial territories than any other place is in the Caribbean. Puerto Rico, St. Thomas, St. Croix, Curacao, Aruba, Bonaire, St. Eustatius, Saba, the French, and Dutch St. Martin, Martinique, Guadeloupe, French St. Martin, French Guyana, Cayenne. Then the British, we have Montserrat, Bermuda, Turks and Caicos, British Virgin Islands, and so on. 22 of them. Right here in this Caribbean. As a fact. I heard it, somebody told me when I was coming here, that Trump says that Puerto Rico is costing America too much. Puerto Rico should get its independence. An amazing thing, Trump as an anti-colonialist, the world has gone completely upside down. Thank you very much.
Well, I'm very thankful for the Prime Minister for presenting that issue, that clarification on Baliso and it now belonging to the state. I know you have your questions, and that's what we're going to do now. We're going to entertain the questions before we move into the next and last item on today's agenda. So your questions, let's have them firing. Question number 1, a mic for the brother.
Real quickly, thank you everyone for being here. Question and comment at the same time. To the speakers from earlier, yes, words mean everything. And we're asking the universities, be it Warwick or High Wycombe or anyone doing the studies, to consider vocabulary, that it means a lot to us. We were not deported from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. We were not forcefully pushed out. When we speak of the Jewish community, they were exiled, right? If it's appropriate for them, let it be appropriate for us. We were exiled from St. Vincent and the Grenadines. So we're asking universities or whoever is speaking on it to know that that matters to us. As far as the island of Baliso, we will be meeting tonight, speaking with a couple of ministers, Prime Minister, talking about a memorandum of understanding that is going to talk about the rights and privileges that will be given to us. Our attitude towards Baliso and St. Vincent and the Grenadines is that there's a kind government here that does not have to do what it's currently doing. I repeat, there is a kind government, and I know that if this is being televised, maybe half of St. Vincent will hate me by the end of this. It's okay. This administration is doing something that it does not have to do, and under our leadership, Prime Minister, we're not going to come here with an attitude of, you owe us something, because we understand that what you're currently doing, you don't have to do. All right? We rest with that. Garabali Palacio.
Thank you very much. Question?
First of all, Prime Minister, could you give her one, please? This beautiful lady here, Prime Minister. First of all, Prime Minister, thank you. My name is Gustavo Santos. For anybody who does not know who I am, I'm going to introduce myself again for the second time. I'm from New York. I am the first Garifuna elected official in the United States. And I want to thank Garabali for bringing me back to St. Vincent. This is my second time in St. Vincent. I was here 25 years ago. It took me 10 hours to get here from Puerto Rico. Now I could get to St. Vincent in 3 hours from New York. So thank you. I also want to say thank you to the Prime Minister. Did he leave already? No. Where is he? Okay. I certainly want to sit down with you, Prime Minister, me and Garabali, to talk about my constituents in New York being the first Garifuna elected official in the United States, about some of the issues that they might want from the island of our island. We just inquire. We just got. It's important to the Garifuna nation, not just here in St. Vincent, but in Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, Nicaragua, to know what the future of this island is going to be. I personally came here to St. Vincent to let you know that there is a politician in the U.S. who's looking on behalf of the Garifuna nation. Whether it's here in St. Vincent, in Honduras, Guatemala, I'm here on behalf of Garifuna people in the whole nation. And I want to express myself, and I want you to know that even though we have gone through a lot in this world, I was elected by 99% Caucasians in the United States, and I'm the only Garifuna there. Okay? And I only did not I beat a medical doctor, Caucasian doctor, to get elected to where I'm at now. So, this is my campaign manager, Adrienne Nicholson. She was the one who walked with me, knocking on people's doors, thinking that I might be shot or killed that same day. That will be my last day. Because they never seen a person like myself at their door. And Adrienne is an example. She could tell you a story. So, I am so happy to be here to St. Vincent for the second time. And I want to work, me and Trevor want to work with the Prime Minister to make sure that every Garifuna person in Nicaragua, Honduras, Belize is part of this discussion about the island of Balisol. Thank you very much to all, and you have a great day.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much.
Colleagues, I want to seek your permission to leave pretty soon. The Cuban ambassador is waiting on me. I have a discussion with him on, we have been we're collecting all the information in relation to the Cuban professionals who are in St. Vincent. The State Department issued a statement that those who are complicit in human trafficking with Cubans may have their visas and that of their families taken away. Well, we don't have any human trafficking with Cubans. They come here, they help. As I said elsewhere, in our area, in the northern side of the country, there's a medical and diagnostic center. In one department alone, the hemodialysis, where we have 60 patients there who come in 3 times a week to do their dialysis. If they don't get their dialysis done, they'll be dead. And the people who control that, the people who do the work there, are the Cubans. So you want to tell me that I must let them die so I could come off a plane in Kennedy? Well, that ain't gonna happen. So I.
Take your visa if you keep dealing with Cuba. And our prime minister said, you know what? Take the visa. He's prioritizing people first, y'all. That's what our elected officials are supposed to do, prioritize the people, right? So I don't think half of this country hears that.
Good professional one as to what we can do. I think Joan wants to say something before I go. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. I'm happy that you're here, and I am happy that you echoed some of the stuff I said yesterday in my speech in terms of reparations. I want to address my colleague here. I am also the first Carib elected officer in Washington, D.C. Okay? So, and I've been elected since 2022. I don't know when you were elected. Last year. Okay, then I beat you by a few years. All right. So you mentioned the 10-point plan, and you read out the points. On it, I didn't hear about land reparations for the people above the river. And I'm really pleased that you know the area up there, because you said as a teenager you wandered up there. But I hope that you can engage me in the discussion about that. I was very pleased when you engaged me in the Balisol stuff and you invited me to come chat with you. And I really think all that Crown land that we have, number one, why do we still have Crown land? The Crown doesn't govern us. And
Actually, the Crown, the British Crown, I tried to change that in 2009 and couldn't succeed.
okay, okay.
Ask those who stopped me from changing it.
Well, let's work on it. I thank you very much. Okay, I'm told my time.
It's
Give
all right.
somebody else the mic.
Okay.
Yeah.
This one.
Professor Federico Lenzerini, our keynote speaker, who is an Italian professor at the University of Siena, our legal international law expert, would like to make a special presentation to Dr. Gonzalez, Prime Minister Gonzalez. Professor Lenzerini.
Yes, thank you very much. I was not prepared to this, but I'm very glad to have this opportunity. I would like to give you one copy of my book on reparations for indigenous peoples that I published in 2008 with Oxford University Press. And this was the beginning of my work with indigenous peoples. And I have been so lucky to have the opportunity to interact with several indigenous communities around the world, and now with the Garifuna people. And it is an immense honor for me to be the chairperson of the Garifuna Reparations Working Group, and of course to have the opportunity to meet.
Thank you very much, Federico. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate this very much.
It's the presentation of another book to the Prime Minister. Yes. Are there any, well, I guess because he would not be here, we can hold the questions. Our final item. Our final item is the presentation of the repertoire report. Beautiful. And we will waive that and go straight to our closing statement and briefing. Mr. Marlon Joseph would do this.
Good afternoon, all. On behalf of the Garifuna Heritage Foundation, I extend sincere gratitude to our presenters and all participants for 3 days of stimulating engagement. Our 12th International Garifuna Conference could not have been successful without your contributions. Our esteemed panelists illuminated this conference with their expert knowledge in response to the theme, Embracing Our Legacy, Strategies for Constructing the Garifuna Component of a 2030 Indigenous Peoples Development Plan. This broad theme was compartmentalized into 5 subheadings to facilitate a more granular examination. Consequently, we are leaving this conference with a better understanding of reparations as a legal construct and with a better appreciation of the relationship between indigenous people, land, identity, and empowerment. This conference informed us and it challenged us. It challenged us to be more alert to the intergenerational trauma that continues to affect the Garinagu who remained in Urume after the forced exile. It challenged us to consider reparations not only as something to be granted from outside, but as something for which we have the internal agency to partially generate. For instance, the reclamation of Balisu to the patrimony of St. Vincent and the Grenadines is an act of reparation. This conference also challenged us to continue our efforts to decolonize the Garifuna story and to continue to collaborate with education stakeholders to repair historic and culture memory. In this regard, there was a new addition to this year's conference. In collaboration with the Ministry of Education, the Garifuna Heritage Foundation held an essay competition in which secondary school students were invited to investigate important topics that connect Urume to the Garifuna diaspora. We were pleased with the response and the output from our students, and we were delighted to have the winners present their essays to this conference. This year's conference saw the return of our Garifuna film series, which will conclude later this evening. This conference acknowledges our creative artists and encourages them to continue their research and reckoning with our history to produce quality, provocative material for public consumption. There were many presentations over the last 3 days, but among them, there was a common and sweet refrain, Balisu. Sweet because of the good news associated with it of late. On March 6, 2025, Dr. Ralph Gonsalves, Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, announced in Parliament that the island of Balisu has been returned to the patrimony of St. Vincent and the Grenadines. The Prime Minister visited and presented at this conference, emphasizing his government's position on Balisu. The government's acquisition of Balisu is a realization of a promise it made a year ago, and we at the Garifuna Heritage Foundation commend the government for delivering on its promise. We strongly support the government's acquisition of Balisu, just as we have always supported the call for reparations for Native genocide. Balisu was, of course, a scene of a crime that continues to rankle the Garifuna people. It was there that 2,500 Garifuna men, women, and children perished as victims of Native genocide. The Garifuna Heritage Foundation, therefore, considers Balisu to be sacred ground where the cherished remains of our ancestors await a proper memorial. Thus, we are hopeful that this act of acquisition is the first phase of a long-deserved institutional memorial. For instance, we look forward to the day when Balisu is declared a national heritage site. When our ancestors who survived genocide on Balisu were forcibly exiled to Central America, the hope to return to Urume never died, but was never realized. The return of Balisu to the patrimony of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Urume, Garifuna homeland, therefore signifies a profound spiritual restoration in which our ancestors rejoice. Together with our ancestors, we are joyful in this most auspicious moment. Again, I say thank you to all of our presenters, all participants, our moderators, chairpersons, our audience, physical and virtual. Thanks to our visiting delegates, the media, and of course, an immense thank you to the University of the West Indies Global Campus, SVG, for collaborating with us for another successful international Garifuna conference. Sereme, Sereme. See you next year.
All right, so with that, we are bringing the curtains down on the more formal side of the day. Before you leave, though, we would like to have a photo of everyone just in front here. We are preparing for another film in our Garifuna film series. This one is Weyanagu. Yunagu, right. And yes, and the filmmaker. I see Mr. Ackley Olton, directed by Angel Valerio. Angel, okay, Angel Valerio. All right, let's gather in the front right here so we could get the photo session out of the way quickly. We move on to the film, and I understand that many of you will be at the cocktail at the Prime Minister's residence later tonight. So
Everyone, please. Those who can. Stephen, please, my brother, come on, brother, let's go. Who would you wind it? Let's say. Who would you wind it? All right. Tiana, open them up. Careful. What do you got on? What do you got on, huh? Destroy it. That was okay, go. Hey, the top people in the back and all of them. That's a stage back there, right? That's a stage back there? Hey, some people can stand on it. The taller people stand on the back stage. Taller people, please stand on the stage. Taller people, there we go. And everyone else back up a little bit, please. Back up a little bit, please. Taller people on the stage. Everyone, please back up a little bit. Hey, everybody back up a little bit. Just watch your step and go right back to the stage.
no, I was gonna put it.
Hello, 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 hello. Good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon, good afternoon. Hello, guys. Good afternoon. Yes, we have one more thing on the agenda. So if I could just invite you to take your last photographs and take a seat, please. All right. Thanks. Got it, yeah. Is that wrangling people? People wrangler.
The last photo. I'm taking a picture, guys.